Welcome to the online training, module number 3 of the Impact Evaluation for Evidence-Based Development. I am Charles Jovu. This module will focus on the impact evaluation designs. And the outline is as follows. First, we'll look at an introduction to the impact evaluation designs. And then we'll also quickly look at the key lessons under this module. And thereafter, we will start looking at lesson 1, which focuses on impact evaluation designs. As a matter of introduction to module 3 on the impact evaluation designs, there are several lessons under this module 3. And the first module will focus on impact evaluation designs, particularly experimental designs. For example, randomized controlled trials. And then we'll also look at quasi or non-randomized designs. Lesson 2 of this module will focus on sampling and sampling techniques that are used in impact evaluation studies. And then the last lesson on this module will be on data collection instruments and the concept of triangulation. Lesson 1, impact evaluation designs. Under this lesson, we will look at the introduction and then delve in on experimental designs and then quasi-experimental designs or non-experimental designs. Introduction to evaluation designs. You may recall from the previous modules that you have covered that impact evaluation studies are mainly focusing on establishing attribution of changes in the outcome to the intervention that has been given or undertaken. But when you look at the concept of design in the context of impact evaluation, it refers to the overall structure of the evaluation. For example, it looks at how indicators measured for the intervention, and such an intervention could be a training program, for example, and non-intervention or no training, for example, conditions that will be examined. So that is part of evaluation design. However, in order to qualify as an impact evaluation, methods based on comparison between the factual and a counterfactual established through experimental design or statistical controls, counterfactual, must be used. So from this, we will notice that constructing the counterfactual is a central issue that evaluation methods seek to address. Impact evaluations have either an experimental or a quasi-experimental design. So we'll see how to choose between the two or the appropriate evaluation design later. choice of appropriate evaluation design. An impact evaluation design must choose the best means of meeting its objectives as defined by the key evaluation questions that it is seeking to answer. So a given set of evaluation questions could be answered by a range of evaluation designs. But researchers must choose the best design from different designs. How do researchers choose the appropriate evaluation design? What kind of guidance do they need or have when choosing evaluation designs? So among other factors, researchers need to consider the nature of the program. In other words, different programs may require different evaluation designs. It's not a one-size-fits-all, but it must be placed within the context of a particular program. Number two, researchers also must consider the nature of the question to be answered. And different questions may demand use of different evaluation designs. Next, researchers must also consider the nature of the data that is available or accessible. In other words, availability of data or lack of availability of data can affect the choice of evaluation designs. And then lastly, but certainly not the least, they must consider availability of time, as well as other resources, and of course, the cost, as indicated in the budget. So all these factors put together help researchers to assess, examine, and decide on a particular or appropriate evaluation design. At the same time, researchers must ask some key questions or thinking of choosing evaluation designs. One such question is, does the dataset contain information for individuals before the intervention and after their program participation or after the intervention? Number two, they must also consider whether similar questionnaires were administered to potential comparison groups, or is there a need to use other survey data or existing data to construct the comparisons? So answers to these questions will provide valuable information to the evaluators or researchers in their choice of the appropriate evaluation design. Now let's move on to experimental or randomized designs. These designs, they compare intervention with non-intervention, also known as control or control group. An example of experimental designs is the randomized control trials. These experimental designs involve the random assignment of participants or subjects or elements to test the effects of an intervention. So random assignment is a key aspect or feature of the experimental designs. Random assignment or random placement of participants, or otherwise assigning subjects to different groups in an experiment using randomization, distinguishes experimental designs from non-experimental designs. Now, this randomization process or random assignment can be done by a chance procedure or a random number generator. So to some extent, there is little influence of the researcher on how subjects or participants are assigned either to the treatment group or to the control group. Participants are randomly allocated either to one or more groups participating in the intervention or a program, or the control group that receives no intervention. So such evaluations that use such kind of arrangement are called randomized controlled trials, such as pre and post design with randomized control group. One of the important advantages of the experimental designs, like randomized control trials, is that these designs reduce the risk of selection bias, where participants and non-participants may have systematic differences in addition to whether they receive the intervention or not. Simply put, they reduce the influence of the researcher in the assignment of subjects or participants to a particular group. In as much as randomized designs help to eliminate or reduce the problem of selection bias, these designs are not without limitations. They have their own drawbacks. For example, particularly in social sciences, these randomized designs are rarely used, and where they are used, they are typically expensive. They are also not amenable to extrapolation. In other words, they may not be so much used for prediction of future outcomes. They also require the control group to be completely unaffected by the intervention or reform or program. But in most of the social sciences programs, food security programs, or nutrition programs, it may be very difficult to completely have a control group that has not been affected by that program. Somehow, there may be some interactions between the control group and the treatment group, the group that has received the intervention. Nonetheless, experimental designs have so much to offer in enhancing, bringing out knowledge of the possible impact of intervention. Now we move on to quasi-experimental designs or non-experimental designs. These designs compare intervention or the group that has received a treatment or an intervention with another group that has not received the intervention. And this is done without random assignment. Now from here, you can remember our discussion on experimental designs, where a random assignment is key. But here, there is no random assignment. So these designs involve constructing a comparison or control group in various ways that do not involve random placement or assignment of participants or subjects. An example, a pre- and post-evaluation exercise or design that has no randomized comparison group. How are these comparison groups constructed? There are different options used in practice, and certainly in practice, these options are used differently. Some may be used more than others for different reasons. But for the purpose of our discussion, we'll look at a few of them. Number one is judgmental matching technique, which involves creating a comparison group by finding a match for each person and site in the treatment group based on the researcher's judgment about what variables are important or not. So it's left to the researcher or evaluator to decide. Next is matched comparisons. Under this, there is matching of participants. This could be farmers or individuals, teachers, students, or organizations, with non-participant on variables that are thought to be relevant. So this can be drawn from what experts are saying about what are the key variables in a particular evaluation study. So that helps to determine the selection of participants in particular groups. Then we move on to propensity score matching. This involves statistically creating comparable groups based on an analysis of the factors that influence people's propensity or probability to participate in the intervention. So this technique uses probabilities of individuals to participate or not in a particular intervention. And we'll look in more details at this later. Then there's also regression discontinuity design, which involves comparing the outcomes of those individuals just below and just above a cutoff point. Where one group receives intervention and the other doesn't, then can be compared. There are also two key options that are used in the analysis of quasi-experimental designs. In other words, how analysis is done in these quasi-experimental designs. So the first approach or option is a single difference, which involves comparing the outcomes in the treatment group with the outcomes in the comparison group at a single point in time following the intervention. What does that mean? It means here, comparison of outcomes between two groups is done only at one time, and this is after the intervention has been implemented, or after implementing the program. Then the other option is double difference, which is also known as difference in difference, or simply DID, which involves comparing the before and after differences for the group receiving the intervention, where they have not been randomly assigned, to the before and after difference for those who did not participate. So here, comparison is done at two different times. Consideration is given to what was the situation before the intervention was implemented. That should be done for both the group that received the treatment or the intervention and the group that did not receive the treatment or the intervention. Then that situation should be compared to the time after implementing the intervention for both the groups. So DID uses two times in its analysis. Thank you for your attention.